Welcome back into The Rundown, a daily podcast where we at CBN News bring you the inside scoop about the stories we're working on. Today is Monday, July 26th, and I'm Madison Seals, here with a couple of headlining stories this week. Today, we're taking a trip to Watters World, a Fox News primetime show hosted by Jesse Watters. Conservatives love him and liberals can't stand him, but his quick-witted smarts and work ethic make him a powerful voice in the news world. He also recently entered into the book world with his new release, How I Saved the World. CBN News correspondent Jenna Browder caught up with Watters and joins me today to talk about his new book and much more. Jenna, Jesse Watters seems like a very genuine guy. Like, what you get is what you see. Can you share a little about his background and family life leading up to Fox? Like, what was it really like in Jesse Watters' world?
Yeah, we kind of got into that in the interview, and that's a big part of the book is how he grew up. And he grew up in Pennsylvania. He's, a huge conservative now, but actually growing up, his parents were more liberal. And so he had this epiphany, I guess you could call it, when he was in college. It was in his dorm room, woke up, and saw that C-SPAN was on, and he saw some Republican lawmakers down on the floor giving their arguments for some bill or some legislation. And he just thought, their arguments make sense. They really kind of explain what the founders meant, more so than the Democrats, the, individual freedoms, all of those things, conservatism. And that's how he became a conservative. So he kind of bucked the trend from his parents, and that's what set him off. And, he was a history major in college, so he was really into all of this. But that wasn't his background, and he became a conservative at a young age. Says that Rush Limbaugh was one of, after that C-SPAN, finding C-SPAN, he started listening to Rush Limbaugh and got into that and just the political conservative thought world, and he was off to the races from there.
That's so surprising that his parents were both liberal. I think you see people like Jesse Watters and you think he just came out of the womb speaking conservative. He's in it so much every day that, I don't know, I guess people just assume that's how he was born and raised. But what a cool story that that's not what he came out of. This was, his own path in life that he decided to take.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And now, he does his own show, The Watters World, and then The Five, of course, which a lot of people know him from. He's out there giving his conservative comments and analysis every day. He's a prominent voice in the conservative world.
Well, can you share a little bit about Jesse's background and how he ended up at the top of Fox?
Yeah, so he graduated from college, and I think worked some odd-end jobs, but ended up getting a job at Fox News down, he says, literally in the basement. He started in the basement where they were recording programs and other things, and he would put tape on the videos and then send them up to the producers. And so that's how he started at the very bottom at Fox News. And there he tells the story about how there was this opportunity for him to submit a resume for the O'Reilly Factor as a production assistant. So he did that, ended up getting that job. He says Bill O'Reilly was quite a character, was tough, very tough, but I think eventually got in Bill O'Reilly's good graces and moved up from there as, started doing his own segments, and that's where Watters World, the man on the street segments that he does even still today, started with that. But I think Bill O'Reilly kind of saw something in him and helped to develop him, and that's really how Jesse climbed the ladder at Fox News, and he's been there for years now.
Again, it's hard to believe he didn't just start out there. He has that bubbly, just kind of friendly, outgoing personality that you think he just walked into Fox and walked straight up. But that's cool to hear how he started literally from the bottom and worked his way up. Mm-hmm. And he also is apparently a great writer and just came out with a new book called How I Saved the World, which was, I guess, the purpose of your interview with him. To be honest, it sounds a little lofty and egocentric. So can you explain what the title means and maybe a little bit about what the book is about?
Yeah, well, I think the title's a play on Watters World, How I Saved the World. And it's definitely a play off of his sense of humor. He's got a very dry, witty sense of humor. And how would I describe it? He's self-deprecating, definitely, but he's also bold in what he puts out there, and is not afraid to be himself. So I think the book is a mixture of that. It's his personal stories, how he became a conservative, why he believes what he believes today, different things like that, and the reasons behind it. And it's funny. I think he meant it. That was one question I had for him. I said, Jesse, what is something that you hope viewers take away from this book? And he said, it is a funny book. You can get some of my opinions, some analysis, personal stories, talking about Donald Trump and being at Mar-a-Lago and just all of these different things. But it's a big reflection, I think, of his dry sense of humor.
Well, and along those same lines, on the back of the book, where there's usually quotes from popular figures praising the book or promoting it, Waters included jabs from the Washington Post, The Daily Show, and his mom. He seems to enjoy criticism and backlash to some degree. Does he carry this mindset into his work on Fox?
Yeah, I think he's really good at dealing with criticism. He's definitely got a lot of critics, especially who are more liberal, who take a lot of jabs at him. But I before I even started reading the book, I looked at the back and I saw, okay, there are all of these, normally there would be praise for the author, but Washington Post, I'm just looking at some quotes here. Jesse Waters is officially out of control. The Daily Show, a smug, unfunny goon. And then he talks about his mom a lot in the book, who's more liberal, and who's kind of always jabbing him, but in a loving, motherly kind of way. But this is Jesse's mom. Where is Dana Perino? She is desperately needed. Dana Perino, she's another Fox News host, and she's on the 5 with Jesse. And so I think he relishes the criticism, and he definitely knows how to fight back. And I don't know, but I would venture to bet that that's what a lot of his biggest fans like, is that he'll take on just about anybody, and people like that fighting spirit.
I agree. I think he has a really good balance and definitely doesn't take life too seriously.
Right.
Well, one of the other more serious things that he talked to you about was who he thinks may make a presidential run in 2024. What were Waters' prospects?
Yeah. Well, I asked him specifically what he thought about Donald Trump and a possible run for 2024. He said that, former President Trump will play a big role in 2022 in the midterms, and then he'll make he'll just go from there, make a decision based on what happens in the midterms. He thinks that he would be a great candidate. So he would, I think, love to see Donald Trump run again. I asked him, if Donald Trump doesn't run in 2024, who else would you like to see? And the one other person he mentioned was Ron DeSantis, the current governor of Florida. He said he's doing a great job with COVID in Florida. He likes the toughness. He likes the directness. He likes how he stands up to establishment media, and it really kind of takes it. It's also, like Jesse, kind of a fighter, and like Donald Trump too. But I think Jesse, those were the two people that he had talked about. Donald Trump, I think he's hopeful for that, and if not Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis.
Definitely popular picks among his followers, I think.
Mm-hmm. They all have that kind of fighting spirit about them, that kind of take it to the establishment spirit.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for the rest of that interview, and I cannot wait to hear the rest of it.
I will say Jesse was really, really funny and really super charming and kind in our interview, and it was a lot of fun talking to him, for sure.
Well, for those listening, you can check out the rest of the interview on the CBN website about a week from today, and I'll be right back with another top story from this week after the break. Thanks for sharing such a fun interview, Jenna.
You bet. Thanks, Madison.
CBN News provides a faith-based perspective on the most important stories of the day. But it takes time, hard work, and resources. Will you help us continue to be a voice for truth in the media? Visit cbnnews.com/give now. And thanks for listening.
Another top story this week. Facebook is back in the doghouse again about censorship. But this time the platform didn't do enough. At least that's what the White House is saying about Facebook's response to the recently released list of vaccine opponents called the Disinformation Dozen. CBN News White House correspondent Eric Phillips joins me today to discuss this battle between freedom of speech and disinformation. Eric, there's this push to deplatform 12 leading online anti-vaxxers, affectionately designated as the Disinformation Dozen by a group no one has ever heard of called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. These anti-vaxxers or vaccine skeptics are well known in the health community and include alternative health specialists and even physicians. So what did these people do to be silenced by this anti-hate group?
I don't know if the group would call themselves affectionately labeling them the Disinformation Dozen, because I think that they were trying to do so in a way that was maybe a little witty, but certainly appropriate and accurate based on what's going on. Basically, what this group, which is a nonprofit organization, discovered was that 12 individuals were responsible and have been responsible for something like 65% of the misinformation that's been placed on social media, and that's across all platforms. And so the White House got a hold of that information and has really been trumpeting the fact that social media platforms, and they really honed in on Facebook specifically, needs to do these platforms need to do their part to make sure that misinformation about COVID-19 is not on their platforms, because the White House perspective is that it feeds into vaccine hesitancy and encourages people to not get the vaccines, and in so doing really feeds into sickness and ultimately death for some people. And so you may have heard as recently as last week when the president was asked what his message was to social media platforms like Facebook, and his response was, they're killing people. And that just really touched off a firestorm, because, no one had ever directly said social media or Facebook was killing people. And so that was something he had to later on walk back and explain, that he wasn't saying that Facebook itself was killing people, but that the information, or perhaps more accurately, the misinformation on Facebook and people consuming it, is what's leading to sickness and ultimately death in some people. So this Disinformation Dozen is just, they are the main, if you will, perpetrators of that misinformation, according to that nonprofit organization.
Well, it's interesting because Facebook has been bashed in the past for being too extreme in their censorship policies, especially against conservative groups and posts. And now the Biden administration seems to think the platform isn't extreme enough. What are the changes the White House is asking Facebook to make?
Well, there are several changes that the White House is asking. They want the platform to disclose the reach of COVID-19 misinformation to the public. In other words, how many people has the misinformation on their platform actually reached before it was taken down? And maybe some of these posts haven't been taken down, because the White House is actually flagging posts for Facebook. So they want to know, what is the reach of this misinformation? They also want Facebook to create an enforcement strategy across all of its platforms and companies. And what that really is in reference to, for example, goes back to that Disinformation Dozen, where those individuals were banned from some sites, but they have not been banned from Facebook, even though they've been banned from some of the other platforms that Facebook owns. And so the White House is saying you need to be consistent in what you're doing and what you're requiring across all of your platforms. They also want Facebook to remove misinformation quicker. They say that it's not happening fast enough. And they want Facebook to promote quality COVID information in its algorithms. In other words, making sure that quality information is being pushed out through its algorithms. Now, I got to point out that Facebook, for its part, has definitely fired back. They did so in a blog that they posted after the White House made these recommendations, saying that they have, since the beginning of the pandemic, removed over 18 million instances of COVID-19 misinformation. and that they've labeled and reduced the visibility of more than 167 million pieces of COVID-19 content. And that was helped by their fact checkers to be debunked. And so Facebook is essentially saying, hey, White House, don't point the finger at us. We're doing our part. And, so sorry that you haven't met your deadlines and your goals to having, a number of people vaccinated that you wanted to have by a certain date. But don't look at us. We're doing our part. And it's unfair for you to bully us. And really, this has turned into a debate about free speech as well.
Right, because other platforms were quicker, but Facebook did take down some of the accounts last week. And the CCDH is also deplatforming these people's organizations or organizational pages as well, like the Informed Consent Action Network and the National Vaccine Information Center. So Facebook doesn't seem to be worried about backlash from free speech or anti-vax advocates. They seem more worried about the administration's accusations, or at least more defensive for the administration. As you mentioned, they defended themselves with all the disinformation they have removed since the beginning of the pandemic. Do you think people in general are more concerned with free speech being silenced, or more concerned about people being negatively affected by the misinformation?
Well, it depends on who you ask. And what you have just articulated is the crux of the debate. Which is more important? That you allow people to express themselves under the rule and law of free speech, which we enjoy in this country. That's what the United States of America is all about. The fact that we do have freedoms here, one of those freedoms is freedom of expression, which falls under free speech. Or does it get to the point of where life and limb supersedes that, and where more extreme steps need to be taken to make sure that misinformation is not put out there for the good of those who would want to enjoy, the freedoms such as free speech. And so I think it very much depends on who you ask. Some would say that, in a case like this, it's necessary to save lives. That's number one. Numero uno, save lives, and do so. That is the government's responsibility to do so where it can. It's necessary for them to take whatever steps they can. But others would argue and are arguing that the government can do so, but not at the risk of overstepping the bounds of free speech. Because in so doing, you're really violating what this country is about. And when you talk about free speech and the ability to abide by that, it doesn't just apply to ideas that are spoken that you agree with. I spoke to one person, John Schweppe, who's the director of policy and government at the American Principles Project, who said, free speech is not just about things that you like or that you agree with. Free speech is just that, free speech. And sometimes it's ugly. Sometimes it's bigoted. Sometimes it's just flat out wrong. Free speech is not always pretty. But how you combat free speech that you find to be incorrect or untrue is by putting more truth out there. You don't, combat the darkness by closing the blinds tighter. You combat darkness by turning on the light, by letting the light in. And in the same way, you combat this speech, this sometimes what may be called hate speech, or certainly misinformation that is just blatantly and totally wrong. You combat that, many will say, by telling the truth and by making sure the truth is put out there and that it's trumpeted. The only way to beat back bad, negative, wrong speech or misinformation is by making sure that you shine the truth in.
Right. Well, are there any organizations combating this perceived threat of silencing free speech from the White House? And do you think that they will be silenced too?
Well, there's a pretty big movement among conservatives right now in general. And you will find that they are rallying together to come against, like you said, this perceived threat against free speech. And one of those organizations is the Media Research Center. They're circulating a letter as we speak, asking people to sign it, And it's a letter, a pretty lengthy one, that's urging the Biden administration to change its course of action, um, contending that what the Biden administration is doing by making these recommendations to Facebook is wrong, that it's impeding free speech, and that it comes off really as a threat. The Biden administration is quick to say that they have made no demands of any social media company, including Facebook, but they did make recommendations or submit proposals. And some would argue that no matter how you slice it, no matter how you try to package it, if you're the White House and you make recommendations or suggestions, it can still come off as very much as a mandate or a demand. It's going to be received that way because of the power that the White House packs. And, John Schweppe, who I mentioned earlier, said it kind of comes off as, hey, Facebook, you got a nice company you got there. Sure would hate to see anything happen to it. Without being spoken, it just comes off as a threat. And that bullying, some would say, is what's wrong. And it's why the White House should not overstep its bounds. And it's why you've got conservative organizations like the Media Research Center fighting back and trying to really rally the troops on the conservative side to push back against this.
Absolutely. Do you think the White House recognizes a difference between skepticism and misinformation at all?
I think that the White House would maintain that anything that they are flagging as misinformation is, in fact, verifiably wrong. In other words, they would argue that it is definitely misinformation, not just perceived misinformation or something that's skeptical or something that could be seen another way, maybe a different perspective. They would argue that it's just bad information that's based in no truth whatsoever. For example, Jen Psaki pointed out here at the White House one day last week that one post that was flagged had to do with the fact that the COVID vaccine could either interfere with pregnancy or could interfere with, if a pregnant woman took it, could interfere with her having a successfully carrying her baby through to birth, or could interfere with the ability to conceive altogether. Just sort of that whole realm. It put out a question mark, for women where childbirth is concerned and conception is concerned. And what she was basically saying was that there is no verified information that points to that there's nothing that the experts have, no conclusions that the experts have reached that has come to that. And when that information is put out there, it is definitely such that it would encourage perhaps a significant portion of the population to stay away, particularly if they're already kind of on the fence and they've already got some hesitancy. That could easily push them over the top. And she would argue that is just misinformation. It's not just skepticism. She would argue it's just wrong.
I think that's a difficult question to answer because both sides of the argument would probably classify misinformation differently. And it's easy to encompass everything that you disagree with as misinformation. And although that's not necessarily what's being done here, it's hard to believe that some of the things that these physicians or doctors that are on this list are saying are all false. You want to think that there's some truth in some of the things that they're saying, and by completely taking them off of a platform, it shuts down everything they have to say, not just certain things that are misinformation. So it's really a difficult line to just completely shut down a person or an organization instead of flagging certain things that may be false. And then, as we've already talked about, where do you draw that line? Where do you draw the line of flagging things and removing a person entirely? I think anyone we talk to, we could probably find some areas of agreement, even if the majority of things we disagree on. So I think this free speech issue will continue as long as we're dealing with the pandemic and really into the future. Now that this has started, I think we're going to constantly have this battle between misinformation and free speech.
Well, this battle of free speech is not new either. You've typically got the Republicans on one side and the Democrats on the other. Usually it's the Republicans who are pushing for greater free speech, and it's the Democrats who are suggesting that we need to tamp down on some messages that may not be beneficial in their view to the general public. And so, and then you've also got hearings on Capitol Hill about how to sort of divest these large conglomerate social media companies that seem to have so much power, and that's being debated right now. So this is an issue that is not new, and it's an issue that is not going away anytime soon. But certainly COVID-19 has given it new life and a different twist, because most of the time this discussion is centering around things that have to do with money or business or a monopoly, that type of thing. But now what makes it more urgent is we're literally talking about life and death situations. And depending upon which side you're sitting on, it really doesn't matter, because it's just as serious on both sides. It's just how you look at it. And the two sides, of course, are looking at it differently.
I think both sides should consider what you said earlier. Don't close the blinds tighter to keep the darkness out. Let the light in to reveal the truth. Thanks for joining me on that mission, and let's just hope that we don't get censored now.
Exactly, and thank you very much for having me.
That's all for now, but if you're enjoying the CBN News Daily Rundown, check out the CBN News app. As certain voices are censored and free speech platforms are shut down, downloading it will ensure you keep receiving news from a Christian perspective. We'll meet you back here Wednesday. Have a great week.